Welcome to the Wisdom Embassy, a place where truth is spoken with clarity, where wisdom meets real life, and where growth is not just encouraged, but expected. This is more than a channel. It is a journey of transformation, a space where minds are renewed, character is strengthened, and purpose is awakened through powerful and timeless principles rooted in faith and understanding. Here at the Wisdom Embassy, we speak to the heart. We address real-life struggles, relationships, purpose, discipline, and the decisions that shape your future. Every message is designed to challenge your thinking, awaken your awareness, and guide you toward becoming a person of strength, wisdom, and integrity. If you have ever felt the weight of life, the confusion of relationships, or the need for deeper understanding, then you are in the right place. The confusion of relationships or the need for deeper understanding. Because this is where truth meets emotion, where lessons meet experience, and where lessons meet experience, and where growth becomes a personal responsibility. Today's message is deeply emotional and real. It speaks about what happens when a man hurts a good woman, the unseen consequences, the silent transformations, and the powerful lessons that follow. This is not just something to listen to. It is something to feel, to reflect on, and to learn from. So take a deep breath, settle your thoughts, and open your heart. Because here at the Wisdom Embassy, every word carries purpose, every message carries power, and every moment is an opportunity to grow into who you were truly meant to be. When a man hurts a good woman, something deeper is set into motion than what the eyes can see, because a good woman is not just defined by her kindness or her patience, but by the spirit she carries, the dignity she protects, and the quiet strength that comes from a heart aligned with righteousness. You must understand that when you wound such a woman, you are not merely affecting her emotions. You are disturbing a divine order that was built on honor, respect, and purpose. A good woman often loves with sincerity, gives without calculation, and stands with loyalty even when it costs her comfort. She reflects the wisdom spoken in Proverbs 31, where a virtuous woman is described as more precious than rubies, her worth far above material measure. So when a man mishandles that kind of treasure, the consequence is not always immediate, but it is always certain, because life has a way of responding to how we treat what is valuable. There are men who think strength is found in dominance, in control, in raising their voice, or withdrawing their affection. But true strength is revealed in gentleness, in understanding, and in restraint. The book of Proverbs says that a soft answer turns away wrath, but harsh words stir up anger. When a man chooses harshness over wisdom, he plants seeds that will eventually grow into distance, regret, and loss. When a good woman is hurt, she does not always react loudly. Sometimes she becomes quiet, and you must be careful of that silence, because it is not empty. That silence is full of reflection, full of realization, and sometimes full of the painful acceptance that she deserves better than what she has received. Ecclesiastes teaches that there's a time to speak and a time to be silent. And when she enters that time of silence, it often means she is weighing her worth against the treatment she has endured. You see, a good woman will endure for a while. She will pray, she will hope, she will try to understand, because her nature is to build, not to destroy. But endurance is not weakness. Patience is not permission for mistreatment. Galatians reminds us that whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. And when a man sows neglect, disrespect, or emotional pain, he should not expect to harvest love, peace, and loyalty. There is a shift that happens inside her. At first, she questions herself. She wonders if she could have done more, said less, been different. That is the compassion within her speaking. But as time goes on, truth begins to rise within her spirit. She begins to understand that love should not feel like constant pain, that respect is not something to beg for, and that her value is not determined by someone else's inability to recognize it. And when that realization settles in her heart, everything begins to change. Her energy shifts, her presence changes. The same woman who once gave freely now becomes careful with her time, her words, and her emotions. Not because she has lost her goodness, but because she has learned the importance of guarding her heart, just as Proverbs instructs to guard your heart with all diligence. For out of it flow the issues of life. For out of it flow the issues of life. A man must understand that a good woman does not stop loving because she wants to. She stops because she has to. There is only so much pain a sincere heart can carry before it begins to protect itself. And when she reaches that point, the connection that once felt effortless becomes distant, and the once felt effortless becomes distant, and the warmth that once filled the relationship begins to fade. Sometimes the man realizes too late. He begins to notice the difference. The conversations are shorter. The laughter is less frequent. The effort is no longer one-sided because she has withdrawn what was once given freely. And in that moment, he may try to fix what has been broken, but repair requires more than words. It requires transformation. The book of Ephesians teaches that a man should love with understanding, with care, and with honor, not as a duty, but as a reflection of character. When that principle is ignored, the relationship suffers not because it was weak, but because it was mishandled. Pain has a way of teaching lessons that comfort never could. Never could. And a good woman, when hurt deeply, often emerges stronger, wiser, and more aware of her worth. She begins to rebuild herself, not with bitterness, but with clarity. She may forgive, because forgiveness is a principle of faith, but forgiveness does not always mean access is restored. That is something many fail to understand. That is something many fail to understand. Forgiveness releases the burden from her heart, but wisdom sets boundaries for her future. And those boundaries are not walls of pride, they are walls of protection. Because once she has seen what disrespect looks like, she becomes intentional about not allowing it again. There is also something else that follows when a man hurts a good woman. He begins to face himself. Whether immediately or over time, there comes a moment of reflection. There comes a moment of reflection. A moment where he sees what he lost, not because it was taken from him, but because he failed to value it. And that realization can be heavy because it carries the weight of missed opportunity. Life does not always give you the same person twice. And when you mishandle someone who is genuine, who is patient, who is committed, you may fin. That what replaces them does not carry the same depth, the same sincerity, or the same grace. That is not punishment, it is consequence. That is consequence. The book of Proverbs also says that he who finds a good woman finds a good thing and obtains favor. Notice that it says favor, not convenience. Favor is not something to take lightly. It is something to honor, to protect, and to nurture, to protect and to nurture. When that favor is neglected, it does not simply remain unchanged. It can be lost. And so the question is not whether a man will feel the effects of hurting a good woman. The question is when and how deeply. Because consequences are not always loud. Sometimes they come in the form of emptiness, in the form of comparison, in the form of realizing that what you once had is no longer within your reach. A good woman does not seek revenge. That is not her nature. Instead, she seeks peace. She seeks healing. She seeks alignment with what is right and what is true. And in doing so, she often rises to a place where the pain no longer defines her but refines her. And as she continues to grow, to rebuild and to rediscover her strength. The man who hurt her may still be trying to understand what went wrong, still trying to piece together the moments he took for granted, still trying to reconcile the fact that something so valuable slipped through his hands not because it was fragile, but because it was not handled with care. And there is a lesson in there for every man who is willing to listen with care. And there is a lesson in that for every man who is willing to listen. Because relationships are not sustained by feelings alone. They are sustained by principles, by discipline, by respect, and by a consistent choice to do what is right, even when it is not easy, because doing what is right is not always convenient. But it is always necessary if you intend to preserve something meaningful. A good woman does not require perfection, but she does require sincerity, and sincerity is reviv, led through consistent action, not temporary effort. Many men make the mistake of trying to correct years of neglect with moments of attention. But relationships do not heal through moments, they heal through patterns that reflect true change. You must understand that the heart of a good woman is not easily given, but once it is given, it carries a depth that is rare. She invests not only her time, but her emotions, her prayers, and her vision for the future. And when that investment is mishandled, it creates a fracture that cannot be repaired by surface-level apologies. Proverbs teaches that the tongue has the power of life and death, and many relationships suffer because words are used carelessly, without awareness of the weight they carry. When a man speaks harshly, dismisses her feelings, or treats her presence as ordinary, he slowly erodes the foundation of trust. Trust is not built in a day, and it is not destroyed in a day either. It is shaped by repeated behavior, by what is done consistently over time. And when trust begins to break, the relationship enters a fragile state where even small actions carry greater impact. A good woman often communicates before she withdraws. She expresses her concerns. She tries to explain what she feels. She hopes to be understood. But when her voice is ignored repeatedly, she begins to realize that she is speaking to someone who hears but does not listen. And there is a difference between hearing and listening. Hearing is passive, but listening requires intention, attention, and care. James reminds us to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. That wisdom is not just for moments of conflict. It is for the daily interactions that shape a relationship. When a man fails to listen, he misses the opportunity to correct small issues before they become large problems. And by the time he recognizes the seriousness of the situation, the distance may already be too great. There is also the matter of respect. A good woman does not compete for attention, she complements a man's life. When she is valued, but when she is disrespected, whether publicly or privately, it sends a message that she is not safe, not secure, and not cherished. And once a woman feels unsafe emotionally, she begins to retreat, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. The book of Colossians speaks about treating one another with kindness, humility, and patience. These are not optional qualities, they are essential principles for any relationship that is meant to last. When these principles are ignored, the relationship begins to reflect the absence of them. Harshness replaces kindness, pride replaces humility, and impatience replaces understanding. And then comes the emotional distance, replaces understanding, and then comes the emotional distance. This is one of the most dangerous stages because it is often quiet and gradual. There are no loud arguments, no dramatic confrontations, just a slow fading of connection. The conversations become routine, the affection becomes limited, and the sense of partnership begins to disappear. And many men mistake this calmness for peace, not realizing that it is actually the absence of engagement. A good woman does not desire to disconnect, but she will not continue to invest where she feels unappreciated. Matthew teaches that where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And when her efforts are no longer valued, she begins to redirect her energy toward her own growth, her own healing, and her own peace. At this stage, something significant begins to happen. She starts rediscovering herself. The same strength that allowed her to endure begins to empower her to rise. She reconnects with her purpose, her passions, and her identity beyond the relationship. And in doing so, she becomes even more aware of her worth. This transformation is not fueled by anger, it is guided by clarity. She understands that love should uplift, not diminish, that partnership should bring support, not stress, and that her value is not dependent on someone else's recognition, but on the truth of who she is. Isaiah speaks about being renewed in strength, about rising up with new energy and endurance, and that is exactly what begins to take place within her. She becomes stronger, not hardened, but refined. She becomes wiser, not closed off, but discerning. And she becomes more intentional about who she allows into her space. Meanwhile, the man who hurt her may begin to notice her change more clearly. He's shaping you. He sees the independence, the confidence, the peace that she carries, and it may confuse him because he expected her to remain the same, to continue giving in the same way, to continue tolerating what once went unaddressed. But growth changes expectations, and awareness changes behavior. And so he may attempt to return, to reconnect, to restore what was lost. But restoration requires alignment with truth. It requires genuine accountability, not excuses. It requires consistent effort, not temporary emotion, because a good woman, once awakened to her worth, does not easily return to a place where she felt diminished. Proverbs teaches that wisdom is the principal thing, and with all you're getting, get understanding. Understanding is what many men lack when they hurt a good woman. They fail to understand her value, her depth, and the significance of her presence. And by the time they gain that understanding, they are often faced with the reality that they no longer have access to what they once had. There is also a spiritual dimension to this. When you mistreat someone who carries a sincere heart, you are not just affecting a relationship, you are affecting your own character. And character shapes destiny. The patterns you practice in relationships reflect the person you are becoming. And if those patterns are rooted in neglect, pride, or carelessness, they will not only impact one relationship, they will follow you into others. Galatians reminds us again that a man reaps what he sows. This is not limited to material things. It applies to relationships, to words, to actions, and to attitudes. If you sow kindness, you reap connection. If you sow respect, you reap trust. But if you sow pain, you will eventually face the consequences of that pain, whether through loss, regret, or missed opportunity. And regret is a powerful teacher. It forces reflection, it reveals truth, and it often comes when it is too late to change the outcome. A man may sit and remember the moments he dismissed, the words he spoke carelessly, the opportunities he had to do better, but chose not to. And in those moments, he begins to understand that what he lost was not ordinary. A good woman is not easily replaced. Her loyalty, her patience, her sincerity, these are qualities that cannot be manufactured. They are cultivated through character, through faith, through a commitment to living with integrity. And when you encounter such a woman, it is not something to take lightly. The book of Ecclesiastes speaks about the value of companionship, about how two are better than one because they support each other and help each other rise. But that principle only works when both individuals are committed to lifting each other up. When one consistently brings the other down, the balance is broken and the relationship cannot function as it was intended. There is also the emotional weight that a good woman carries when she is hurt. She does not simply forget. She processes. She reflects. She seeks understanding. And in many cases, she prays. She brings her pain before God, asking for strength, for clarity, for healing. And in that process, she finds a peace that does not come from the relationship, but from her faith. Psalm speaks about the Lord being close to the brokenhearted and saving those who are crushed in spirit. And that truth becomes real in her life. She is not alone in her pain. She is supported, comforted, and guided through it. Comforted and guided through it. And that spiritual support strengthens her in ways that external validation never could. As she heals, she does not become bitter. She becomes better. She becomes better. She does not lose her capacity to love. She refines it. She becomes more intentional, more discerning, more aligned with what is right. And that growth positions her for a future that reflects the lessons she has learned. And so when a man hurts a good woman, what follows is not just her pain, but her transformation. What follows is not just his actions, but his consequences. What follows is a series of changes that reveal truth, expose character, and reshape both individuals in different ways. For the woman, it is a journey of rediscovery, of healing, of rising into a stronger version of herself. For the man, it is a moment of reckoning, of reflection, of facing the reality of what his actions have produced. And in that contrast, there is a lesson that cannot be ignored, because every relationship you enter is an opportunity to reflect your character, to demonstrate your values, and to honor the person who has chosen to walk alongside you. And when that opportunity is mishandled, it does not simply disappear without impact. It leaves behind consequences that shape your future, your mindset, and your understanding of what truly matters in life. And the truth is, many men are not taught how to value what is good. They are taught how to pursue, how to achieve, how to acquire, but not how to sustain, not how to nurture, not how to protect what they have been given. And because of that lack of understanding, they mishandle what was meant to be a blessing, turning it into a lesson that could have been avoided if wisdom had been applied from the beginning. And wisdom is not something that appears suddenly. It is developed through humility. And wisdom is not something that appears suddenly. It is developed through humility, through a willingness to learn, through the ability to admit when you are wrong and to make the necessary adjustments before it is too late. And many relationships would survive if men embrace correction instead of resisting it. And many relationships would survive if men embrace correction instead of resisting it. If they listened instead of dismissing, if they valued instead of overlooking, because a good woman does not expect you to be flawless. But she does expect you to be teachable. She expects growth. She expects effort. She expects effort. She expects a heart that is willing to align with what is right. And when that expectation is met, the relationship flourishes. It becomes a place of peace, of support, of shared purpose. But when that expectation is ignored, the relationship struggles under the weight of imbalance. And imbalance cannot sustain unity, because unity requires contribution from both sides. It requires mutual respect, mutual effort, mutual understanding. And when one person carries more than the other for too long, exhaustion sets in. And that exhaustion is not just physical, it is emotional, it is mental, it is spiritual. And once a person reaches that point, they begin to reconsider everything. They begin to question whether this is what love is supposed to feel like, whether this is what partnership is meant to be, whether this is where they are meant to remain. And those questions lead to decisions, and those decisions lead to change. And that change often comes in ways that cannot be reversed once it has fully taken place. And so the message is clear, though it is often ignored, that how you treat a good woman will determine not only the quality of your relationship, but the direction of your life. Because relationships are not isolated experiences. They are interconnected with your growth, your character, your peace, and your purpose. And when you get it wrong in this area, it affects more than just one part of your life. It creates a ripple effect that extends far beyond what you initially see. And that is why it is so important to approach relationships with reverence, with awareness, with a sense of responsibility that reflects an understanding of what you have been given. Because a good woman is not common. She is not easily found. And she is not easily replaced. And she is not easily replaced. And when you fail to recognize that, you place yourself in a position where you may spend years trying to recover something that was lost in a moment of carelessness. And carelessness is often the result of taking things for granted, of assuming that what is present today will remain tomorrow, regardless of how it is treated. But life does not operate on assumptions. It responds to actions, to choices, to patterns. And when those patterns are negative, the outcome will reflect that reality, whether you are prepared for it or not. And many men come to this realization later than they should, after the distance has been created, after the connection has been broken, after the opportunity to correct has passed. And in that moment of realization, there is often a desire to go back, to do things differently, to speak more kindly, to listen more carefully, to appreciate more openly, to appreciate more openly. But time does not always offer that opportunity again. And that is why wisdom must be applied now, not later. In the present moment, where your actions still have the power to shape the outcome, where your words still have the power to heal instead of harm, where where your choices still have the ability to build instead of break. Because once certain lines are crossed, once certain wounds are inflicted, the process of restoration becomes new. The process of restoration becomes mute. He's shaping you. He's more difficult than it ever needed to be. And difficulty in restoration is not just about effort. It is about trust. Because trust once broken does not return easily. It must be rebuilt slowly, consistently, intentionally. And even then, it may never return to its original state. And that is a reality that many fail to consider when they act without thinking, when they speak without care. When they speak without care, when they treat a good woman as though she will always remain, regardless of how she is handled, and yet despite all of this, there is still an opportunity for growth, for change, for transformation, because every mistake carries a lesson. Every failure carries a message. Every loss carries a truth that can shape you into a better person. If you are willing to receive it, if you are willing to receive it, if you are willing to reflect, if you are willing to take responsibility instead of shifting blame, because responsibility is the beginning of change, it is the moment where you stop looking outward and start looking inward. Where you stop asking what went wrong around you and start asking what went wrong within you. And start asking what went wrong within you. And that question opens the door to a level of awareness that can redefine how you approach every relationship moving forward. And that awareness teaches you to value what is real, to recognize sincerity, to appreciate consistency, to honor loyalty, and to never again take lightly what once you overlooked. Because once you truly understand the cost of losing a good woman, you begin to see relationships not as temporary experiences, but as meaningful connections that require effort, discipline, and intention every single day. And in that understanding, there is a shift, a transformation in how you think, how you speak, how you act, and how you love. Because love is not just a feeling, it is a commitment to doing what is right, even when it is inconvenient, to doing what is right, even when it is inconvenient, even when it requires sacrifice, even when it nages your ego. Because true love is not centered on self. It is rooted in principle, in patience, in kindness, in truth, just as it is written in Corinthians that love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. And when you align yourself with that definition, you begin to operate differently. You begin to treat people differently. You begin to understand that love is not something you demand, it is something you demonstrate. And when that demonstration is consistent, it creates an environment where a good woman can thrive, or she can feel safe, valued, and appreciated in a way that reflects the depth of who she is. And that kind of environment does not happen by accident. It is built intentionally through daily choices, through mindful communication, through a commitment to growth that does not stop when things are comfortable, but continues even when things are challenging. Because challenges are a part of every relationship. But how you respond to those challenges determines whether the relationship strengthens or weakens over time. And so when a man hurts a good woman, what follows is not just a moment of pain. It is a chain of events that reveals truth, that exposes character, that forces growth, whether it is embraced or resisted. And that chain continues until the lesson is learned, until the awareness is gained. Until the awareness is gained, until the transformation takes place in a way that ensures the same mistake is not repeated again in the future. And when that transformation is delayed, the cycle often repeats itself in different forms, with different people in different situations, yet carrying the same root issue that was never addressed. Because what is not corrected within will continue to manifest outwardly, and many men find themselves wondering why relationships fail without realizing that the pattern is not external, it is internal. The absence of discipline, the lack of emotional awareness, the unwillingness to grow, these are the unseen forces that quietly shape outcomes over time. A man must come to a place where he understands that leadership in a relationship is not about control, it is about responsibility. But then, responsibility It is about setting the tone through character, through consistency, through a commitment to doing what is right, regardless of how he feels in the moment, to doing what is right, regardless of how he feels in the moment. Feelings are temporary, but principles are stable, and any relationship that is built on feelings alone will struggle when those feelings are tested. The book of Proverbs speaks again about the wise man building his house upon understanding. The book of Proverbs speaks again about the wise man building his house upon understanding. That house is not made of walls and roofs. It is made of decisions, of attitudes, of habits that either strengthen or weaken the foundation. And when a man hurts a good woman, he is in many ways weakening the very structure he is meant to protect. There is also the matter of accountability. Many men are quick to defend themselves, to justify their actions, to explain why they behaved in a certain way. But accountability requires something different. It requires honesty without excuses. It requires the ability to say I was wrong without adding conditions to that statement. Because true accountability is not about protecting your image. It is about correcting your behavior. And a good woman can recognize the difference between empty words and genuine change. She has experienced enough to know when someone is speaking from emotion versus when they are acting from conviction. Words may create a moment of hope, but actions over time create trust. And without trust, even the strongest feelings cannot sustain a relationship. The scripture in Micah reminds us to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly. That humility is essential because pride is often the barrier that prevents men from acknowledging their faults. Pride whispers that you are always right, that you do not need to change, that the problem lies elsewhere. But humility reveals truth, and truth is the beginning of transformation. When humility enters a man's life, he begins to see things differently. He begins to listen more carefully, to observe more deeply, to consider the impact of his actions before he takes them. He begins to understand that strength is not found in being unyielding, but in being teachable. And that shift changes everything because it allows growth to take place where resistance once existed. There is also a deeper emotional layer that often goes unspoken. Many men carry wounds of their own. Experiences that shaped how they express themselves, how they respond to conflict, how they handle vulnerability. But unhealed wounds do not justify harmful behavior. They explain it, but they do not excuse it. Healing is a responsibility, not an option, especially when your actions affect someone else. Nekinal, when your actions affect someone else. The book of Psalms speaks about creating a clean heart and renewing a right spirit within. That renewal is not automatic. It requires intention. It requires a willingness to confront what is broken within you and to seek growth through faith, through reflection, through discipline. Because if you do not heal, you will continue to project your pain onto those who do not deserve it. And a good woman, despite her strength, is not meant to carry the weight of someone else's unresolved struggles. She is meant to be a partner, not a place where pain is released without accountability. Not a place where pain is released without accountability. And when she realizes that she is being placed in that position, she begins to step back, not out of rejection, but out of preservation. There is a dignity that a good woman carries, and that dignity does not allow her to remain in spaces where she is consistently diminished. She may try, she may endure, she may hope for change, but there comes a moment where her sense of self aligns with truth, and that truth tells her that she deserves better. And when she reaches that point, her decisions are no longer driven by emotion, they are guided by clarity. She does not act impulsively, she acts intentionally. She does not speak out of anger, she speaks from understanding. And sometimes that understanding leads her to distance herself completely from what once held her close. That distance is often misunderstood. It is seen as coldness, as indifference, as a lack of care. But in reality, it is a sign of growth. It is evidence that she has moved beyond a place where she tolerated what was harmful and into a place where she tolerated what was harmful into a place where she protects what is valuable within her. Meanwhile, the man is faced with a reality that he may not have anticipated. The presence he once relied on is no longer there in the same way. The support he once received is no longer as accessible. And in that absence, there is a silence that forces reflection. It is no longer about what she did or did not do. It is about what he did and how it affected everything. Ecclesiastes reminds us that God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing. That principle extends beyond spiritual matters into the way we treat people. Nothing is overlooked. Every action carries weight. Every word leaves an impression. Every choice contributes to an outcome that will eventually reveal itself. And so the man must face the truth that hurting a good woman is not a small matter. It is not something that can be dismissed or minimized. It is a significant act that disrupts not only the relationship, but also his own path of growth. Because how you treat others is a reflection of who you are becoming. If a man chooses to ignore that truth, he will continue in patterns that lead to repeated loss. But if he chooses to ace it, to learn from it, to grow through it, then even his mistakes can become stepping stones toward a better future. The choice is always present, but the outcome depends on whether that choice is acted upon. There is also the aspect of timing. Many men wait until it is too late to change. Many men wait until it is too late to change. They wait until the distance is undeniable, until the connection is broken, until the woman has already begun to move forward. And in that moment, the urgency they feel is real, but it is delayed. It is a response to loss rather than a commitment to growth. Wisdom, however, operates differently. Wisdom acts before the damage becomes irreversible. Wisdom recognizes the value of what is present and treats it accordingly. Wisdom does not wait for absence to create appreciation. It practices appreciation daily, consistently, intentionally. The book of Proverbs says that the wise store up knowledge, but the mouth of a fool invites ruin. Knowledge is not just information, it is understanding applied. And understanding teaches a man that a good woman is not something to experiment with, not something to test boundaries with, but something to honor with consistency and care. And honor is not expressed through grand gestures alone. It is expressed in the small daily actions that often go unnoticed, but carry great significance. It is in the way you speak, the way you listen, the way you respond when she is vulnerable, the way you support her when she is challenged. These moments define the relationship more than any single event ever could. When those moments are handled with care, the relationship grows stronger. When they are mishandled, the cracks begin to form. And over time, those cracks can become fractures that are difficult to repair. A good woman does not expect perfection in those moments, but she does expect effort. She expects sincerity. She expects to see that her praise name matters, that her voice is valued, that her heart is safe. And when those expectations are consistently unmet, the realization begins to settle in that she cannot continue in the same way. There is also a spiritual accountability that cannot be ignored. Romans teaches that each person will give an account of themselves. That accountability includes how we treat those entrusted to our lives. A good woman is not placed in your life by accident. Her presence carries purpose, and how you respond to that purpose matters. If you respond with care, with respect, with growth, then the relationship becomes a source of strength. But if you respond with neglect, with pride, with inconsistency, then the relationship becomes a source of strain. And that strain affects not only the individuals involved, but also the direction of their lives. Because relationships influence decisions, they shape perspectives, they impact emotional and spiritual well-being. And when a relationship is damaged through repeated hurt, it creates a ripple effect that extends into other areas of life. This is why it is so important to understand the weight of your actions. Nothing exists in isolation. Nothing exists in isolation. Every choice contributes to a larger picture. And when you consistently choose actions that hurt rather than heal, that break rather than build, you are shaping a reality that will eventually reflect those choices. And yet, even in this truth, there is still an opportunity. Because awareness creates a turning point. Because awareness creates a turning point. It offers a moment where a man can decide to do better, to be better, to align his actions with principles that lead to growth rather than destruction. That turning point requires courage. It requires the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths, to let go of harmful habits, to embrace discipline in areas that were once neglected. It requires a commitment to becoming the kind of man we will. Paul does not repeat the same mistakes, and that commitment is not proven in words. It is proven in consistency. It is seen in how you handle conflict, how you respond to correction, how you treat the person in your life on a daily basis. Because consistency reveals character more clearly than anything else. A good woman, once hurt, becomes more aware of this. She pays attention not just to what is said, but to what is done repeatedly. She looks for alignment between words and actions. And if that alignment is not present, she does not ignore it. She recognizes it for what it is. That recognition is what protects her from returning to cycles that once caused her pain. It is what allows her to move forward with clarity, with strength, with a deeper understanding of what she will and will not accept. And so the reality remains that when a man hurts a good woman, what follows is a series of changes that cannot be undone simply by desire. They require transformation, they require time, they require truth. And without those elements, the distance that was created will continue to grow. And as that distance grows, it begins to reshape not only the relationship, but the identity of both individuals involved, because experiences leave imprints, and those imprints influence how a person sees themselves and how they interact with others moving forward. And for the woman, it often becomes a lesson in self-worth, in boundaries, in discernment, while for the man, it becomes a reflection of missed responsibility and unfulfilled potential if he chooses to ignore the lesson placed before him. And if he continues to ignore that lesson, life has a way of repeating it in different forms until it is finally understood, because truth does not disappear when it is avoided. It remains present, waiting to be acknowledged. Many men move from one relationship to another without realizing that the same patterns are following them, the same reactions, the same habits, the same lack of awareness, and they wonder why the outcomes remain unchanged. But change does not come from a new person. It comes from a renewed mind and a transformed character. Romans speaks about being transformed by the renewing of your mind, and that renewing of your mind and that renewal is essential if a man is to grow beyond the mistakes that once defined his actions. It requires intentional effort, not just reflection, but correction. Not just awareness, but application, but correction. Not just awareness, but application. Because knowing what is right without doing what is right does not produce growth. It only produces frustration. There is a difference between regret and repentance. Regret feels the weight of what was lost, but repentance changes the direction of what will come. Regret looks backward, but repentance moves forward with a new mindset, a new discipline, a new commitment to live differently. And many men remain in regret because they do not take the step into true change. A good woman, on the other hand, often steps into growth more decisively. Once she understands what she has experienced, she begins to apply wisdom in a way that reshapes her future. She becomes more attentive to character, more aware of patterns, more intentional about the environments she allows herself to remain in. And this is not because she has become hard, but because she has become wise. Proverbs teaches that wisdom is a tree of life to those who embrace it. And through her experience, she begins to embrace that wisdom more fully. She learns to value peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, consistency over empty promises. And these values begin to guide her decisions in a way that protects her from repeating the same pain. Meanwhile, the man who hurt her is given an opportunity, whether he realizes it or not, to examine himself more deeply than ever before. Because loss has a way of revealing what comfort hides. When everything is present, it is easy to overlook its value, but when something is gone, its absence speaks loudly. Say, that absence can become a teacher if he allows it. It can show him where he failed to listen, where he failed to appreciate, where he failed to lead with integrity. And in that realization, there is a chance to grow into a better version of himself. But growth is a choice, not a guarantee. There's also the matter of consistency in spiritual life. A man cannot expect to live without discipline and still experience stability in his relationships. Faith is not just something to speak about, it is something to practice. It is reflected in how you treat others, how you respond under pressure, how you manage your emotions when situations become difficult. The book of James reminds us that faith without works is dead, and in relationships, those works are seen in daily behavior. They are seen in patience, in kindness, in the ability to control anger, in the willingness to forgive while also making necessary changes. Without these expressions, words of faith remain incomplete. When a man aligns his actions with his beliefs, his character begins to reflect stability. And that stability creates an environment where a good woman can feel secure, valued, and understood. But when there is a disconnect between belief and behavior, it creates confusion, and confusion weakens trust. Trust, once broken, does not return simply because time has passed. It returns through consistent demonstration of change. It returns to actions that are repeated over time without contradiction. And even then, it requires patience, because healing is a process, not an event. A good woman understands this process. She does not rush healing. She allows it to unfold. She takes the time to reflect, to grow, to rebuild her sense of self in a way that is not dependent on external validation. And in doing so, she becomes stronger in ways that are not always visible, but deeply rooted within her. Isaiah speaks about rebuilding ancient ruins and restoring places long devastated. That restoration is not just physical, it is emotional and spiritual as well. And that is what takes place within her. She rebuilds what was broken, not by returning to what caused the damage, but by moving forward with a renewed sense of purpose. And as she moves forward, she carries lessons that shape her future decisions. She becomes more intentional about who she allows into her life, more aware of the qualities that truly matter, more aligned with values that support growth rather than hinder it. At the same time, the man must confront the reality that growth cannot be borrowed from someone else. He cannot rely on a new relationship to fix what he has not addressed within himself. He cannot rely on a new relationship to fix what he has not addressed within himself. Because unresolved issues do not disappear. They resurface. And when they resurface, they bring with them the same consequences they were once experienced. This is why self-examination is so important. It is not about blame, it is about responsibility. It is about recognizing where change is needed and taking the steps to implement that change consistently. Because without that effort, the cycle will continue. The book of Lamentations reminds us that it is good for a man to bear the yoke in his youth, to sit alone and be silent, to reflect and to learn. There is value in stillness, in taking the time to understand what went wrong and how to move forward differently. And many men avoid this process because it is uncomfortable. But growth is often found in discomfort. When a man embraces that process, he begins to develop a deeper sense of awareness. He becomes more mindful of his actions, more considerate of others, more aligned with principles that lead to healthy relationships. And this transformation, when genuine, becomes evident in every area of his life. But without that transformation, the consequences of his actions remain. He may continue to encounter relationships that reflect the same challenges, the same conflicts, the same outcomes. And this repetition is not coincidence, it is a reflection of unresolved patterns. A good woman, however, does not remain in those patterns once she recognizes them. She learns, she grows, she moves forward with intention. And that movement often leads her to environments that reflect the growth she has achieved. Reflect the growth she has achieved. Psalm speaks about being planted by streams of water, bringing forth fruit in season, whose leaf does not wither, That imagery reflects stability, nourishment, and growth. And that is what she begins to embody. She becomes rooted in truth, nourished by wisdom and fruitful in her life because she has aligned herself with what is right. And as she continues on that path, the memory of what she endured does not control her. It informs her. It becomes a reference point, not a limitation. It reminds her of what she has overcome and what she will no longer accept. For the man, the memory of what he lost can either become a burden or a lesson. Can either become a burden or a lesson. It can weigh him down if he remains in regret, or it can lift him into growth if he chooses to learn from it. The outcome depends on his response. Proverbs says that as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. And that thought life shapes behavior. If he continues to justify his actions, he remains unchanged. But if he begins to challenge his own thinking, to align it with truth, to reject harmful patterns, then change becomes possible. That change requires discipline. It requires consistency. It requires a commitment to doing what is right, even when it is difficult. Because transformation is not a one-time decision, it is a daily practice. Because transformation is not a one-time decision, it is a daily practice. And through that practice, a man can become someone who no longer repeats the mistakes of the past. He can become someone who values what is good, who honors what is sincere, who protects what is meaningful. But that outcome is not automatic. It is earned through effort and intention. Meanwhile, the good woman continues to rise and intention. Meanwhile, the good woman continues to rise. She continues to build a life that reflects her values, her strength, her faith. She surrounds herself with what brings peace, with what supports her growth, with what aligns with her purpose. And in that space, she finds a sense of fulfillment that is not dependent on the past. She finds joy in her progress, in her healing, in her ability to move forward with clarity and confidence, in her healing, in her ability to move forward with clarity and confidence. The book of Philippians speaks about pressing forward toward what lies ahead, forgetting what is behind. And that is what she does. She does not remain trapped in what was. She moves toward what can be. And that forward movement is what defines her strength. For the man, the same opportunity exists, but it requires a different response. It requires letting go of pride, embracing humility, committing to growth. It requires understanding that hurting a good woman is not just an event, it is a revelation of character that must be addressed if he is to move forward in a healthy way. And when that understanding becomes real, it begins to reshape how he sees relationships, how he approaches them, how he sustains them. It teaches him that love is not about taking, but about giving. Not about control, but about a responsibility. Not about convenience, but about commitment. And this understanding, once fully embraced, has the power to change everything. It has the power to break cycles, to restore character, to create a future that reflects growth instead of repetition. But until that understanding is applied, the consequences remain. The lessons repeat, the Tao and the reality of what was lost continues to echo in ways that cannot be ignored. And those echoes are not always loud, but they are persistent, showing up in quiet moments, in reflections, in comparisons and realizations that come when a man sees what he once had, and men sees what he once had, and understands more clearly what he failed to protect. And those realizations carry a weight that cannot be easily dismissed because they are rooted in truth, and truth has a way of remaining present, even when it is uncomfortable. Even when it is inconvenient, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it is inconvenient, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it is requires a level of honesty that challenges everything a man once believed about himself and his actions. And when that honesty finally settles within him, it begins to strip away every excuse, every justification, every layer of denial that once made it easy to overlook. His actions, and in that moment he is faced with himself, not the image he presented to others, not the image he presented to others. Not the version of himself shaped by pride, but the reality of who he has been through his choices, his words, and his behavior. And that moment of truth is uncomfortable, but it is necessary, because without it there can be no real change. And as that awareness deepens, he begins to see the small things that once seemed insignificant. The tone of his voice, the way he dismissed her concerns, the times he chose silence when he should have spoken. Life, the moments he prioritized his ego over her feelings, and he realizes that it was not one major act that caused the damage, but a pattern of smaller actions repeated over time. And this realization begins to reshape how he understands relationships, because he sees that what is built daily is what defines the outcome eventually. And this is where responsibility must take root, because awareness without action does not produce transformation. It only creates a deeper sense of regret and hour. Egret without change becomes a burden that follows a man into every future connection. And that burden affects how he shows up, how he communicates, how he responds. And without addressing it, he risks carrying the same issues into new situations, repeating the same cycle under different circumstances. And so he must decide whether he will remain in that cycle or step out of it through intentional growth. And that decision is not made once it is made daily, through choices that reflect discipline, through actions that demonstrate. Understanding through a commitment to align his behavior with principles that produce healthy outcomes. And this is not easy, because it requires consistency, especially when it would be easier to fall back into old habits. But growth has always required effort. And Scripture reminds us in Hebrews that discipline may not feel pleasant at the time, but it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who are trained by it. And that training is exactly what is needed to become a man who no longer harms what is good, but instead protects and nurtures it with care and awareness. While this process is unfolding within him, the good woman continues her journey forward, not looking back with bitterness, but moving ahead with wisdom and purpose. And as she moves forward, she carries a deeper understanding of what love should look like, what respect should feel like, and what consistency should be present in a healthy relationship. And these standards are not unrealistic. They are rooted in truth, in dignity, and in a clear sense of self-worth. And as she continues to grow, she becomes more aligned with peace, not the absence of challenges, but the presence of stability within herself. She no longer seeks validation from those who cannot provide it. She no longer tries to convince anyone of her value. She simply lives in a way that reflects it, and this quiet confidence, Biko, means a defining part of who she is. And in that confidence there is strength, not loud or forceful, but steady and grounded. She understanding that her worth is not determined by how she was treated in the past, but by who she is in truth. And this understanding allows her to move forward without carrying the weight of what she has already released. And in doing so, she becomes an example of resilience, of growth, of what it means to rise after being hurt. For the man, the process of change continues to challenge him in ways that test his commitment, because it is one thing to recognize a mistake and another to consistently live differently. And this is where many fall short. They begin the process, but do not sustain it. They make temporary adjustments, but do not develop lasting habits. And without develop lasting habits and without develop lasting habits and without develop lasting habits and without develop lasting the process. Do not develop lasting habits and without develop lasting habits and without develop consistency, those changes fade and the old patterns return. And this is why discipline must become a lifestyle, not a reaction. It must be something he practices daily, in how he speaks, in how he listens, in how he responds to situations that once triggered negative behavior. And over time, these consistent actions begin to reshape his character in a way that is visible not only to others, but to himself. And as his character begins to change, his perspective also shifts. He begins to see relationships not as something to manage, but as something to honor. He understands that the presence of a good woman is not an entitlement, but a responsibility. And that responsibility requires care, attention, and a willingness to grow continually. Scripture in Proverbs speaks of the prudent man who foresees danger and takes precautions. And this applies not only to physical situations, but to emotional and relational ones as well. Because a wise man recognizes the potential consequences of his actions before they unfold and adjusts accordingly to avoid causing harm. And this awareness becomes a guiding principle in how he navigates relationships moving forward, and yet even with growth there may remain a sense of loss, a recognition that what was once present is no longer available in the same way. And this reality can be difficult to accept because it carries with it the understanding that some opportunities do not return, and this is where acceptance must take place, not as a form of defeat, but as a step toward moving forward with clarity. Acceptance allows him to release what cannot be changed and focus on what can be improved. It allows him to take the lessons from the past and apply them to his present and future in a way that ensures growth is not wasted but transformed into wisdom that shapes his life positively. And as he continues on this path, he begins to develop a deeper respect for what is good. He no longer overlooks sincerity. He no longer takes loyalty for granted. He no longer takes loyalty for granted. He no longer treats patience as something to exploit. And this shift in perspective changes the way he interacts with others, creating healthier connections built on mutual respect and understanding. For the good woman, her journey continues to unfold in ways that reflect her strength and her faith. She becomes more aligned with purpose, more connected to what brings her fulfillment, and more intentional about the relationship she allows into her life. And in this alignment, she finds a sense of peace that is not dependent on external circumstances, but rooted within her. The book of Psalms speaks about being guided along the right path. And this guidance becomes evident in her life as she makes decisions that reflect wisdom rather than emotion. And this clarity allows her to avoid situations that would compromise her peace, choosing instead environments that support her growth and well-being. And as time moves forward, both individuals are shaped by what they have experienced, but in different ways, one through the process of rebuilding and rising, the other through the process of reflecting and transforming. And in both cases, there's an opportunity for growth that extends beyond what was lost into what can be gained through understanding and application of truth. And so the impact of hurting a good woman does not end with the moment of pain. It extends into a process that challenges both individuals to grow to reflect, to change, and to align themselves with principles that lead to better outcomes. And this process continues until the lessons are fully embraced and the patterns are replaced with actions that reflect wisdom, consistency, and care. And as this process unfolds, it becomes clear that relationships are not just about connection, but about responsibility, about the ability to nurture what is valuable and to protect what is meaningful. And when that responsibility is taken seriously, it creates an environment where both individuals can thrive. But when it is neglected, it leads to outcomes that serve as lessons rather than lasting connections. And in all of this, there remains a truth that cannot be ignored, that how a man treats a good woman reveals more about him than it does about her, because her value remains constant, while his actions determine whether he is capable of recognizing and honoring that value. And that realization becomes a defining moment in his journey toward becoming a man who no longer repeats the mistakes of the past, but instead lives in a way that reflects growth, maturity, and a deep understanding of what it truly means to love with sincerity and purpose. So in the end, the message is simple yet powerful, that every man must come to understand that how he treats a good woman is not just a reflection of his behavior, but a revelation of his character. Because a good woman does not lose her value when she is hurt. The man loses the privilege of experiencing her at her best. And life has a way of teaching this lesson with clarity that cannot be ignored, because what is taken lightly today may become what is deeply missed tomorrow, and what is not valued in the moment may become what is longed for in its absence. And this is why wisdom must guide every action, every word, every response, because once something genuine is broken, it is never quite the same again. The truth is that good woman will rise, she will heal, she will grow, and she will move forward with strength and dignity, while the man is left with a choice either to remain the same and repeat the cycle, or to transform and become better through the lesson he has been given. And that choice will define the direction of his life, far beyond a single relationship, because in the end, it is not about what was lost, but about what was learned, and whether that lesson is strong enough to change the man into someone who no longer harms what is good, but protects it, values it, and nurtures it with consistency and care. And when that understanding becomes real, when it is lived and not just spoken, then and only then does a man step into the maturity required to sustain something meaningful, because love was never meant to be careless. It was meant to be cultivated with wisdom, guarded with discipline, and expressed with truth in every moment that it is given.